He says, God is dead. We've killed him.
We've rendered and revealed God as superfluous and even as an oppressor, because God is just an artificial. He's like Oz in The Wizard of Oz. He's really just a souped up fake. To have killed God, we must have become gods ourselves. Who else could do it? What he's saying is, again, like Feuerbach, the potential is in us. Those who long for an afterworld or an overworld really despise themselves and the only world they've got. Well, then, this is my preaching for their ears. I am Zarathustra the godless who speaks. Who is more godless than I, that I may delight in his instruction? You owe it to yourself to be joyful and to safeguard and defend that which delights you, no matter what anybody else thinks.
Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And I'm back with one of the regulars, Dr. Robert M. Price, 2-time PhD, and today we're talking about Nietzsche, and in particular some Thus Spoke Zarathustra, maybe some postmodern philosophy. And there's a lot I want to say about this. The only book I've read on this subject is Thus Spoke Zarathustra, but from what I've gathered, that's enough to know to understand Nietzsche enough to kind of get a grasp what he's trying to say. I mean, I'm sure there's way more out there. There's the gay science. There's Beyond Good and Evil, and I definitely want to get to those at some point in my lifetime, because this is a thinker who comes along once every 100 years type person. And just from this book alone, I changed the way I saw the world and changed it. It's just incredible. But I'm going to throw it over to you, and you can just take it away.
Well, this is the main thing I've read by him, though, like you intimate, the gay science, with the famous madman passage, really, in a sense, that ought to be part of this. It's like a miniature Thus Spake Zarathustra in its own right. And I had read various things by and about Nietzsche, but I was reading this through because I was teaching a philosophy class at the time at Montclair State College, and it was I happened to be reading it while I was in Georgia, I think, for a fantasy and horror convention that was purposely not planned out. They figured they'd just let it happen, and so there were no panels, no speakers or anything. And that might be a good idea sometimes, but it didn't seem to help this one. And so I spent a lot of the weekend just reading this book because there was nothing else to do. And while I was reading it, I had this moment of realization, which sounds like I'm paranoid, schizophrenic with delusions of grandeur, but I felt like I am the Zarathustra for today. Just like you said that, in a way, Nietzsche was assuming the mantle of the ancient prophet Zarathustra, or Zoroaster, the Greek version, about which little is known, actually. I felt like I am the one to bear this mantle and hoist up this banner today, and I began to write a column, which I still do years later, called Zarathustra Speaks, where I have the temerity and the effrontery to pose as Zarathustra, and so. At the end of every one of them, it says, so says Zarathustra. And I do share a lot of this perspective about how you owe it to yourself to be joyful and to safeguard and defend that which delights you, no matter what anybody else thinks. You have the responsibility to decide what your quote good and evil should be. You have to remember that there ultimately is no absolute value and no God, but you have to maintain the category of fiction as opposed to truth, lest you begin to imagine that your fiction is the truth. But there isn't any truth of that kind. There's no objective truth. Meaning is in the eye of the beholder, which is the only place it could be. If you have the traditional God, which he's rebelling against, this is the God who is dead. Well, what is true? Well, just his favorite view, the meaning in his eyes. That doesn't make it true. It's like the old problem of divine voluntarism. Is good good? Is evil evil just because a powerful being says so? That can't be. That undermines the reality of truth, morality, etc., rather than establishing it. It's and yet if there is an objective standard, then there can't be a God as conventionally described, because there can only be one ultimate. And is God simply like Zeus, who is subject to fate himself, and so forth? And the idea that you should be joyful, you have the right to be joyful about reality, and to become the Superman. I don't like the way Kaufman translates this as the Overman. I mean that's accurate because the Übermensch, Uber does mean over, but then so does super. It's just the Latin.
Right.
I prefer the Superman
Me too.
part because I'm a comics fan, but but that's good actually. That's kind of part of the package of the modern mythic hero Superman, that
Yeah.
he's not exactly different from us in a way to dwarf and belittle us, but is somehow a sign of hope that we can do the same thing on our level if we realize that. And I just and let me two quotes that I really love personally. He says that there can't be any gods because if there were, I could not endure not being a god. And I love that.
I love it.
And this is sort of the flip side of Feuerbach, who says, well, there is a God, but it's you. All the divine predicates and attributes that you predicate of God, they're the excellences of the human spirit, the human heart. You're denying them where they are in order to magnify them where they're not, in an imaginary super being above you. And I think that's kind of what Nietzsche is saying also. Um, well, another one of these quotes to the same effect, I guess, is when I shout, "Curse all cowardly devils in you who like to whine and fold their hands and pray," they shout, "Zarathustra is godless." And their teachers of resignation shout it especially. But it is precisely into their ears that I like to shout, "Yes, I am Zarathustra the godless." These teachers of resignation, whatever is small and sick and scabby, they crawl to like lice, and only my nausea prevents me from squashing them. Well, then, this is my preaching for their ears. I
Mhm.
am Zarathustra the godless who speaks. Who is more godless than I, that I may delight in his instruction? It's great.
That is so
And
good.
oh man,
So the reason why I love that quote right there is because
mm,
it's on a deeper level. What Nietzsche is saying is, I think he's looking back at all these historical figures like Jesus and Zarathustra and Moses or whatever, and he picks Zarathustra carefully out of those because he's basically the one who changes the fabric of reality of the time period of a world that's full of pagan, hundreds of gods, and this guy comes along and says there's only one God, and it's just basically and not. I mean, he whether you want to interpret it as like he's a Mazda worshiper or whatever, but in the Gnostic sense, he's talking about the creator and like the duality of like evil and good, which is interesting because there's other titles beyond good and evil. But I think he chose what I'm getting at is I think he chose Zarathustra because he's making himself a new Zarathustra and going one step further and saying, yeah, Zarathustra got away from this world of pagan gods into this one God, but I'm going even farther, and now I'm going beyond that one God. God is dead, and he changes the fabric of reality. I mean, you can't deny postmodern philosophy is flourishing right now, and this sort of credit Nietzsche and a couple other people with being the ones who sort of brought that out. And so I think he chooses Zarathustra in the sense that he even says, "I am Zarathustra," and not because he believes in Zoroastrianism, but because he knows that he's doing something. He's contributing to that rope. Mankind is the rope to the Superman, and his contribution is bringing about this world philosophy of there is no metaphysical world. What you see is all there is. Forget Plato, forget Aristotle. Those guys don't know anything. This is it. If you want to live forever, we got to do it on this plane of reality. And that is just, and it resonates with so many. It's so powerful. I can't even I don't even have words to describe it because he changed everything. He really did.
Yeah, he says those who long for an afterworld or an overworld really despise themselves and the only world they've got. So it's an escape from themselves, which again is kind of like Feuerbach. And he says you've got to learn to rejoice in what you have and what you are, which is glorious. And there's that's so important. And I agree that Nietzsche is absolutely important for postmodernism. And yet, look at he speaks of how the Superman has to not allow himself to be taken down by the stinging of poisonous flies who are always buzzing around him, either criticizing him or trying to co-opt and dilute his views. And how ironic that just as he anticipated, postmodernists are the most loud and obnoxious ones today. Are preaching the exact opposite. Somehow, ironically, it's come full circle. He says, "Oh, uh, you're preachers of equality. The tyrannomania of impotence clamors thus out of you for equality. Your most secret ambitions to be tyrants thus shroud themselves in words of virtue. Aggrieved conceit, repressed envy, perhaps the conceit and envy of your fathers erupt from you as a flame and as the frenzy of revenge." If that doesn't perfectly describe the situation we're in with all this woke baloney, oh, I mean, that is exactly it.
And those same people call themselves postmodernists.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because the entire point of postmodernism is to question everything and not be dogmatic about anything. It's to be formless, like Bruce Lee would say. But postmodernists today, a lot of them are very dogmatic about certain things, about equality, whatnot. I'm not saying equality is not a good thing, but like this is where Nietzsche gets controversial because he's the type of person who would say he sort of would reject the egalitarian worldview, and he sort of would say we need to help out the ones that are going to progress mankind and forget about the ones that are going to drag us down. And like a lot of people will interpret that as like he didn't care about the poor and the needy. He just wanted he all he cared about was revolution and progressing mankind and industrial revolution, this, that, and the third, and making the world like, into like this Superman type thing. And he only wanted to focus on the strong and forget the weak. That's what people say. I'm not sure if that's exactly how you should interpret him, but people interpret him that way. And that's where he gets controversial. So I don't know what you think about that.
Well, that I think is I mean, the fact that Hitler apparently interpreted Nietzsche that way, and
There you
so
go.
Nietzsche gets blamed for that. But in fact, it's like what you need to do is to foster the greatness of the Superman for the sake of everybody else.
Right.
That if you don't, you're resting content with mediocrity and worse, and nothing's ever going to happen. I think of how I remember during the horrible Obama regime, though it looks a lot better than the Great Tribulation in which we now find ourselves. They had this liberal, pragmatic approach that we don't need to spend money on the space program. Let's use the money for welfare payments instead, and for drug addicts and all that. Don't you see what you're doing there? You're just reinforcing this sickness, and like you said about Christianity, it's the sick room religion, and that's what you're making the norm. You have to reach out for the stars metaphysically, or now literally. I mean, we couldn't have done it literally if it hadn't been done metaphorically as a mythic way of expressing our aspirations. And so you've got to approach that. I remember in the church I pastored before I got there, there were a very creative but tiny congregation. Many of them ex-theology students, in fact, interestingly. They had two great programs. One was the Human Needs Ministry, which passed out donated groceries to the poor in the neighborhood, and it was a real good thing. But there was also what was called the religious experience through film, where they would show great art films. I really got an education out of that.
Absolutely.
And there were sometimes tensions between the two groups, that the folks involved in this human needs ministry thought only in terms of filling stomachs, etc., which of course you need to do. But the other side said, "Look, we're not criticizing that, but there are other human needs, needs for meaning and so forth." And so to see and discuss these films, that's a human need too, or caters to one. And so there's this problem again. Are you just going to look down at the ground, as Lovecraft called them, the self-blinded earth gazers? Or are you going to look to the stars and try to bring everybody up, or at least in principle? In fact, Nietzsche also had a kind of a Buddhist bodhisattva thing going on, as I read him, that the Superman isn't defensive, and which is what he would have to be to despise the little ones and the ungifted and all that. No, that would be a kind of envy that tries to build itself up because it secretly is motivated by self-doubt. If you attain the stance of the Superman who reevaluates values and so on, you can then look at the lesser ones with bodhisattva like compassion. You don't have anything to prove by exalting yourself over them. It's not that kind of self promotion or self exaltation. And now perhaps you're in the position to be of some use. And like I think James Fowler says in his interesting book, Stages of Faith, he says that he's kind of a Jungian, and he says that, as Jung does, that everybody has to become an arrogant nuisance of a jerk when they're an adolescent because they have to consolidate their ego. They have to become somebody, but that shouldn't be the end of it. The ego then becomes a launching pad to go higher and become the self with a capital S. And that one thing that happens is uh, between those two, you're learning your responsibilities as a human being, and you try to meet them, and at first it's you, then it's your family, then it's your society and all that. The circle of your interests is growing um, wider all the time until once you finally hit, I think it was stage 7 in this schema, you've hit the capital S self, and you no longer, now you're the center, okay, but there really isn't a circumference anymore, because you've come to where it's no sacrifice to work for the concerns of all, because they're not just theirs. Your selfhood has expanded so that their concerns are your concerns. And a great example of this living Superman was Albert Schweitzer, and so that if you really understand what the Superman is. And I think the Gnostics were like this too. They get vilified in like in First John as hating their brethren, and it implies that in First Corinthians 12 through 14 also. Well, that's they're probably talking about real people that they knew who were just arrogant stuffed shirts. I can prophesy, and you poor schlumph, can't. Yeah, probably so. But those people, where does it say in Galatians or somewhere? Let him who thinks he knows take a second look. Maybe he doesn't know as he thinks he does, and that's the kind of people they're describing. But you can't throw out the baby with the baptismal water here. I mean, Buddhism and Gnosticism, for instance, and I think Nietzsche saw that, and the real super person has no need to despise anybody, though he may need to protect himself from them. But that's a different thing. Love your enemies. That doesn't mean they're not your enemies. So you got to be wise as a serpent, though innocent as a dove in your motives. It makes perfect sense. And that's the role of the Superman, not to sneer at anybody. Like the opposite of that is in the Gospel of John, where the Pharisees who think they know so, or the Sanhedrinists anyway, they think they know so much. Is it this accursed multitude that knoweth not the law? That's not the way to go. You know, you don't know what you think you know in that case. And then Jesus also in John says, how can you, um, um, what is it, please God or whatever, if you're only seeking glory from one another? Yeah, there you go. Very shrewd psychologically and very Nietzsche. And
Yeah. So now let's get into this God is dead concept. A lot of people misinterpret that as Nietzsche sort of trying to be like you see like modern atheists today where they just sort of want to God is dead and ha ha ha, you checkmate against you Christians. But he had a different meaning behind this because people forget about what he says right after that. God is, let me pull it up. God is, well, no, actually it's in the other, he says, God is dead. We've killed him. So he's basically saying, what does he mean by we have killed him?
we've rendered and revealed God as superfluous and even as an oppressor, because God is just an artificial He's like Oz and the Wizard of Oz. He's really just a souped up
Uh,
fake to give authority to weak humans who don't deserve it. And he says, to have killed God, we must become gods we must have become gods ourselves. Who else could do it? And I think what he's saying is, again, like Feuerbach, the potential is in us. And this worshiping the false god, well, that's like the archons in Gnosticism. I think when Colossians and Ephesians and Galatians says that you're worshiping the elemental spirits and those that are no gods, that's like what the Wizard of Oz again, and like conventional religion, you are really directing your worship toward false gods who established that worship for their good, not yours. Now, admittedly, there are important values taught there because you naturally want to have a society where crime does not run rampant like it does in our collapsing country. But you don't want that. But if that were to be destroyed, uh, the worship would not go to the archons. In fact, there's a great illustration of that in one of the Omen novels, because there were two novels after the three movies. And in one of them, you find, I guess it's Armageddon 2000, I believe is the name of it. And the idea is that Damien Thorne is dead and he's not coming back, but he impregnated this Barbara Walters type character of the reporter from the previous movie. And the result is a kid who is worse than Damien. Damien wanted to rule the world, rule humanity, but this new kid who calls himself Baal wants to wipe out humanity. And
uh-oh.
even the Satanists don't want this. They try to stop him. That's the idea of the archons, that even they don't want chaos. I mean, you may have the mob running Chicago. That's bad. But if there were nobody running it, as today, that's loads worse still. And so the nature of God and the gods has been revealed, and there is no such objective authority. We've just been bullied by those who claim to be the spokesman for the one that is the objective authority. And you don't need that to come up with a workable social contract and to have pragmatic values. Thomas Aquinas nearly said that when he said that natural law has its own integrity appropriate to the created order. And now we have an obligation to work for that because the creator did make it the way it is. But if you said there wasn't a creator, it's pretty much the same thing. It has to run by certain rules or it's just not going to work because we're social animals and all that. So Nietzscheanism is a kind of nihilism, but only a kind of it. It's not just what the hell, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. It says, no, let's hold up the world like Atlas did. There aren't gods, but we're the titans, and it falls to us to do it. One other great novel that sort of shows this, there's two of them by James Blish. One is called Black Easter, where Satan manages to kill God. But what happens? He finds he must become God in order to replace him and have the same responsibilities and all of that stuff. And that's kind of Nietzschean. When we killed God, we realized the scam that was going on, and that there isn't a God that saps our potential and our responsibility. And because that's really phonies, mortals like ourselves who are just yelling into a bullhorn and we hear it and think it's the voice of God. So we expose the scam and bear the world on our shoulders. There isn't an objective truth, but that really doesn't matter. That's part of the scam too. And there doesn't need to be. It's not like, oh, you think it's okay to rape and murder? Go ahead. I can't stop you. Oh, yeah, I can stop you, and I will. Because you're a nut. You're an anomaly. Everybody else knows we cannot have this. Oh, but in the realm of forms, is it right or wrong? Who cares? Where we You might not be able to win a debate with the Nazis, but that doesn't mean you have to stand back and let them do what they want. So it seems to me that he really gets maligned and for the death of God. One other thing, and I'll shut up about
No,
this.
go ahead.
Um, I had the great fortune to talk at length with Gabriel Vahanian, who wrote the book in the 60s, The Death of God. And more recently, I talked with and interviewed Thomas Altizer, also associated with the Death of God movement. He was a Nietzschean. And what an amazing visionary and thinker. And he said that when Christ died on the cross, yeah, that is a way of saying that the sacred yielded itself up and poured itself out into the profane, which is the only way it can exist as a shadow, as a trace, um, and very Derridean also. And that the descent into hell is a great myth about that. And so we look for the transcendent in the midst of the immanent, just like Mahayana Buddhism. You don't go out there searching for nirvana to escape this world. No, you realize that samsara is like a veil over nirvana, and finally even is nirvana. And that's why you can rejoice in the temporality of the world, because you're no longer deluded about its importance. It's not what you thought it was, but it's fine anyhow. And all this randomness. But Vahanian said, what I said was the sickness, Altizer thinks is the medicine. And what he meant by that was he's just talking sociology, that the secularization of the world in Europe and increasingly here, that God doesn't make any difference anymore. He thought that was a bad thing. I think he's sort of like Tillich there, that if you are all for autonomy, we'll decide what's right and such, you may be becoming shallow. You may have forgotten that there is a transcendent depth to things. And that's what I think is going on in secularist atheism, with their tin ear about everything. The woke culture. And so I think Vahanian was saying something like that there is a ground of being for society that we suffer for getting rid of. That wasn't quite what Altizer was, a bit more mystical, and so was Derrida. And I love these guys, and I refuse to say, "Oh, you're just giving aid and comfort to the woke crowd." No, no, they're the ones that are transgressing the insights of the people they claim to follow.
Yeah. And oftentimes you hear people say that Nietzsche wanted to replace religion with art. Do you think that's true?
That does kind of make sense, because like Don Cupid, another sort of neo-Nietzschean, says that even theology and philosophy are artistic literary creations. When you feel compelled to make a philosophical or theological system, that's an aesthetic act. You think everything should fit together like puzzle pieces, whereas it might be more realistic to say what Helena, I guess, the matriarch of the Ekdal family and Bergman's Fanny and Alexander, she's talking to the ghost of her son, and she's saying, ever when you died, reality shattered, but I don't bother trying to put the pieces back together, for it feels better this way. Well, that's as
Mhm.
far as we can know. That's probably the way it is. You're desperately trying to come up with a definable system that, by its nature, must be inadequate.
Right.
There's some theorem in math that says something like that, that you can't come up with a system that will cover everything.
Yeah. I think I think that's true. And so in Christianity, like you said earlier about the Wizard of Oz thing, it's like Christianity sort of came around and it made sense at the time. I'm sure it made sense to a lot of people at the time.
Hmm.
And then over the course of many centuries, that veil slowly started to slip off, and all of a sudden, people are able to poke holes in its logic. And by the time you get to Nietzsche, it's like, this is completely dead religion. But I always wonder if Carl Jung. A lot of times they get compared to each other, and I
Hmm.
don't. Not maybe they deserve to be compared to each other, but
Hmm.
Carl Jung in the Red Book, it sounds like he's responding to Nietzsche. I don't know if he was or not. Doesn't say if he is, but he literally says God is not dead. He is alive as ever. God is creation, for he is something definite and therefore differentiated from the pleroma. God is a quality of the pleroma, and everything I have said about creation also applies to him. But he is distinct from creation in that he is much more indefinite and indeterminable. He is less differentiated than creation, since he is the ground of essence of effective fullness. Only insofar as he is definite and differentiated is he creation, and such he is a manifestation of the effective fullness of the pleroma. So then he says, moreover, God is the pleroma itself, just as the smallest point in the created and uncreated is the pleroma itself. And it almost sounds like he's responding to Nietzsche in that. But I can't really say if that's true or not. He doesn't say that, but it sounds like he is, the way he phrases it. Do you think that or no?
Well, he says there's no need to believe in God, because he says he knows there is a God,
Yeah.
because God is inside as an archetype. Like, and again, where else could he be? And this, you could be reductionistic about it and say, well, yeah, the archetypes and so forth are the hard wiring of the brain, but that doesn't make them any less important. Tillich was a friend of Jung. He was, I think that he, Heidegger and Bultmann all knew each other. Can you imagine the council of the gods attending a meeting of these guys? Well, Tillich said he urged Jung to go the whole way and to admit that the archetypes are the ontological structures of being, but that Jung wouldn't quite go that far. But it sounds to me what Jung is saying there, well, is much like what Tillich says about the God beyond the God of theism. He says God is both a person and the negation of himself as a person. And I don't know if he meant this, but that sounds very much like non dualist Vedanta Hinduism, where it says that there is the great abyss of being, Satchitananda, Nirguna Brahman, Brahman without qualities. And yet, on a lower level of knowledge, he becomes Ishvara, the Lord, or the theistic creator, Brahma, without the
Oh,
N on the end. And it's like for us to relate to the ultimate Godhead, which is also us, because our Atman is the Brahman. It is separated in an illusory fashion. It's helpful to have this less illusory than us, but more than Nirguna Brahman, this Ishvara, this mediator. And that's kind of what this it sounds like in this quote from Jung, that the pleroma, this is it, the fullness, and yet there is, insofar as it can be manifested to us, you have to draw a line between the manifestation and that which is being manifest. Like when they used to say in Egypt that um, Thoth is the face of Ra. He's the like Hermes. He's the Logos of Zeus, and that's kind of what a great book by this is called by about this by Raimondo Panikkar, who was a uh, at least half Asian Indian. I forget what else, but he's both a Hindu and a Roman Catholic, and he says in this book, "The Unknown Christ of Hinduism," that's what the Logos is in Christianity, that intermediary stage between the ground of being and us illusory individuals. And it sounds to me sort of like that's what Jung is saying. It's sort of Neoplatonic. There's this ultimacy, but then it begins to divide, and that's where you got Abraxas with the two faces.
The effect, he
And,
calls it.
and so you got positive and negative, but above them, you didn't even have that differentiation. But now that it's become differentiated, the way of saying the same thing, that it is the all, is to say it's like the Tao, the positive, the negative, the male, the female, and so on.
Wow, that's a good way to put it, because he doesn't. It seems like Jung's not trying to bring anyone back to dogmatic Christianity, religious type. What he's doing is he's applying the archetypes. So,
Mm-hmm.
the sun, Helios, is God, and then he's saying the effects from the sun is Abraxas, and he's saying the spark of God is actually inside like the inside the Atman or whatever, which is soul. But he's not really trying to go into like this metaphysical language. He's basically trying to. It's simply just to apply, like I just said, applying archetypes to what we see is all there is, and I think that's where they agree on. They totally agree on that part. But so what I think is fascinating is how Nietzsche gets interpreted by different people, and he has a dark side to him, like the Nazis. How does the Nazis relate to Nietzsche? How do they take the Superman concept, the Ubermensch, and they turn it into this like this idea of like the perfect Aryan race. How do you go from what Nietzsche's trying to say to that?
Well, it just seems to me it's a gross misinterpretation. He may have just heard as much as he wanted to and liked some phrases. And in fact, the idea of the Superman was kind of more common in um, uh, Germany at the time. And they awaited the coming of a Superman to lead them out of the doldrums, I guess, after World War One. And he decided, well, c'est moi. Uh, but it's like Nietzsche could not have countenanced the idea of a super race. In fact, he probably would say the whole endeavor is a way of trying to suck the value creating Ubermensch down among the midgets or into the cloud of poisonous stinging flies. The idea of a collectivity of that are over everybody else. That just seems like not Nietzschean. He's talking about he does speak of the great noon that is coming when people will throw off all the shackles. But even that's a kind of an ideal. He didn't say that the Superman had arrived on the scene yet, though you do have to kind of wonder if Zarathustra himself is supposed to be the Superman.
Yeah.
It seems to me that he sort of is. Did Nietzsche think he himself was? Well, he might well have. I guess you almost have to say he figured he was. Um, but then the true Messiah denies his divinity, as it says in the life of Brian. That you wouldn't say it, you would just do it.
Yeah. And so I'm sort of glad we have the Superman in English and we have the movies and the comics because I mean I've heard Michael Sugru, the Princeton philosopher professor. I heard him say that he likes to use the word Obermensch because he thinks they're confusing the two. But I actually don't agree with that.
Mm.
I like the concept of thinking of Superman when you're thinking
Mm.
of the Ubermensch because Superman is the pinnacle of all there is perfection. Someone who can't die, who can stop a speeding bullet, who's going to save everybody and put himself out there. So
Mm.
I actually think that, and another reason why I love it because it's an art form. It's replaced. It's a mythos in its own self, and now you see in this world that we live in right now. Every couple of years, a new Superman movie comes out, a different director, a different actor, possibly, and basically within these films, there is a new teaching or a new philosophy or a new trying to bring a new message to the world. That to me is the future of logos, I would say.
Hmm.
See
Yeah,
what
that makes sense. Think of how in Man of Steel, General Zod has demanded that they cough up Kal-El, if anybody knows where he's hiding. And he's trying to decide, should I surrender myself to him? And he goes to this priest and is saying, I'm the guy they're talking about. What do you think I ought to do? And behind him, you can see the stained glass um, um, depiction of Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. So he decides he will turn himself over for the good of others. And this does lead to a lot of terrible destruction and so on, but he saves the world. And so here is this guy, the most powerful being on earth, who realizes that the way he can save humanity is by sacrificing himself potentially. And then, when at the end, to save those few people in that bank from Zod killing him with his heat vision, he snaps his neck and then screams out in lamentation. He didn't want to kill this guy. He didn't want to kill anybody, but it had to be done. That's an interesting thing. In fact, in the comics, Superman took a vow that if he ever wound up killing anybody, he would renounce his powers and disappear. And so there is this. In fact, there's a really good book on this by um, Max Scheler, who was a German a sociologist, philosopher, and theologian. And it's called ressentiment, which is the French word that Nietzsche used to describe the envy and hatred of those whom you have helped. And Nietzsche says that explicitly: the people you help are going to hate you and take revenge for your helping. And that's why all these nations hate us and so on. They want to be us. And if we help them, that only rubs it in that they're not us. And
wow.
which doesn't mean you shouldn't help them, but you better expect that. And in this book, he says that he gives a Christian slant on Nietzsche, and I think an accurate one. He just highlights the fact that the Superman doesn't hate and doesn't need to hate, and has compassion on those who are lower than he is. And it's an amazing. I mean, it seems like alchemy. How can he possibly come up with this Christian interpretation? But it's simply an explication of what is there, I think. And
Yeah.
the Christians, I think, ought to realize that, and that's part of is Jesus the Superman? Well, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and Nietzsche thought so too. Um,
yeah.
and
And I noticed that he talks about Zarathustra going down from the high mountain, and I almost wonder if he's basically saying he's coming from the most high to go down to the depths of like of where not, and to bring wisdom from high wisdom down to the low. And then he even talks about these three metamorphoses. I want to hear what if you have any interpretation of this. He says how the spirit becometh a camel, the camel a lion, and the lion at last a child. Is that a reference to the rope becoming Superman? What, or is that something completely different?
read it again. I'm sorry.
He
The
says,
camel, the
the
lion.
three metamorphoses of the spirit do I designate to you, how the spirit becometh a camel, the camel a lion, and the lion at last a child. And this is right when he comes down from the mountain and meets up with the people that he is basically preaching to. And
Well,
it's go ahead.
well, the camel is the beast of burden, though dangerous if it turns on you. And the lion embraces its fearsome might. And maybe you've got to go through that to be reborn and to start out anew, like coming out of the cocoon. But
Interesting. That's interesting. Because you know what I thought. I was gonna want to hear you first, but this is what I thought. I think he's saying the camel is like a primitive race of human, just learning how to survive, how to maintain its water supply, and certain things that make a society a society. Then the lion is like the era, like the Iron Age, and like the going to war against other societies and conquering, eating other animals, and sort of becoming that form of human race. But then there's the child being born again and becoming peaceful and becoming more of like a loving the earth. And that's another thing he talks about is loving the earth. He literally says remain true to the earth. But the child also is not an adult yet. The child has to keep growing too. So that's where you get to the Superman. So I think he's talking about the rope, and he's just being a little bit more specific about it, because he constantly mentions the rope to this. Mankind is the rope to the Superman. That's all you are. And what are you doing? What are you doing to progress mankind to get to that point? Or are you just an NPC character that's just going to live and die and do nothing and contribute nothing to the world and be literally just a body, an NPC character?
there's some stuff in the Gospel of Thomas that sounds kind of like this. Blessed is the man who eats the lion, for the lion shall become man. Blessed is the lion who eats the man, for the lion shall become man. And it's based partly on a fragment in Plato where Socrates uses similar imagery. And in the Gospel of John, Jesus' disciples see a Samaritan carrying a lamb in the direction of Jerusalem. And he says, what do you suppose he's going to do with that lamb? And I say, well, he'll kill it and eat it ultimately. And he said, well, don't you become lambs just carried to your doom and wind up being killed and eaten? I love that gospel.
That is so perfect what you just said right there for what we were just talking about. That is because that's what he's talking about. He's like, when he's talking about progressing mankind to its Superman potential, are you just that lamb that's going to get slaughtered like everyone else, or are you going to be one of the metamorphoses? Are you the lion? Are you the camel? Are you the child? Like, and now that you mention it the way you did, I almost wonder, and I would lean towards probably yes, that he was building off of those parts of scripture, of those concepts of
Well, he wouldn't have known the Gospel of Thomas. It only came to light. I mean, there were a few sayings and fragments in the Oxyrhynchus papyri discovered in the,
That's right.
I guess, the early 20th century, but the whole text was discovered for the first time in 1945, also in Egypt. And Jung did have some of the Gnostic texts. They presented it to him because he was so well known as a Gnostic, but I doubt if Nietzsche knew about that. He would have known the Platonic thing. Yeah, it's. I find these things tend to interlock
Yeah,
because people have come up with the same thing and reinvented the wheel of Dharma, I guess you could say, again and again.
yeah. Um, but and before we close out, do you think that Nietzsche would have like he? I think he. I'm pretty sure he despised Socrates and the Socratean thinking. I think he was more of like a revolutionary thinker who I think he probably would have respected Socrates, but I think he was anti-Socrates very much. What do you think about that?
I'd need to read more of what he said about Greek philosophy because he probably addresses that, and I've not read it.
And no, and I agree. I like I said, I haven't gone past this book right here, the Spoke Zarathustra. I only reason why I brought that up, I heard someone talking about that, how he probably it was actually Michael. I was talking about Michael Sagru, that professor of Princeton philosophy. He was talking about how they're just the two are the philosophy of everything being forms, the Platonic worldview versus the postmodern worldview is just basically diametrically opposed. But yeah, you're right. I would have to agree that I have to look into that some more, and that could be we could probably dig more into this in another time. But thanks for coming on. This has been a great. It's always great to have you on, Dr. Price.
No, it's loads of fun. You're prompting me to make connections and pull stuff out of the mothballs and make something of it again.
I'm glad I can do that. And
Oh, yeah.
for everyone watching, look up Dr. Robert Price on Amazon, and you have a Patreon page. Anything else you have, or websites or anything?
Yeah, robertmprice.mindvendor.com. There's an archive of my sermons and articles and all kinds of stuff there. It's undergoing a huge renovation at the moment. It'll be easier to navigate and look better before too long. But there's a lot of stuff there, and there's like a donation button for PayPal and
There you go.
so on. And my Zarathustra Speaks column is available. I think there's an archive of those there too, but it now appears on my Patreon thing on no regular basis, but every once in a while. In fact, I did a column there called Nietzsche and the Nanny State.
Nice.
Pursue some of this stuff.
That's interesting. That's fascinating stuff right there. And there you go, right there. If you want to keep continuing this this topic right here, just go right to that link right there. And you have just attained true gnosis.